You are about to see Mark Lakeman speaking on public placemaking at the UCSC Kresge Town Hall on Thursday, February 5th, 2015. The event was hosted by the Kresge Common Ground Center, Education for a Just and Sustainable World. For more information, visit kresge.ucsc.edu/common ground.
Well, I just come down from Portland and drove through the night. Got a little bit of sleep, but I like driving at night because I'm alone with my imagination. When you're doing a lot of community building work, you make a lot of friends. And they call you, they invite you to dinner, they want you to help with their projects. So you don't get a lot of time with your imagination alone. A lot of your time ends up being taken up with things that you had no idea that you're going to be involved in when you're working on community building. In some ways, that's particularly true of living in the USA, and I'll explain why. It's actually pretty simple. For those of you who have gone to Mexico, Central and South America, and are familiar with the plazas and zocolos that are there, you may come back here and wonder why you don't see them, north of the border. And as Noam Chomsky keeps trying to help people understand, something happened that was rather unique in the history of the world and of the colonial grid in the USA and Canada both, but most intensely in the USA. And that is, at a certain point, people stopped making their own environments.
I'm sorry, by plazas you mean the church and the central,
Yeah, plaza and zocalo, I should explain. Yeah, the great commons, the social gathering places that so many other countries have. And I mentioned plazas and zocolos because those are what you find commonly south of the border between us and Mexico. And there tends to be more than one per town or village. They tend to be spaced at a certain kind of regular interval, but they help people to come outside and to interact with other people and to build a sense of something greater than just themselves. And it's interesting because for those of us who live in the USA, we'll go to these other countries. In fact, we'll save our money to fly across the ocean to go visit a place that has public squares or village centers, piazzas in Italy, in plazas in Spain. They're called Platz in German and Place in France, and that's just kind of the European context. They're really all over the world, except in places where developers, bankers, and politicians decide how everyone else will live. You're totally familiar with this because you've lived in it if you're from this country most all your life, unless you're from a really old town on the East Coast that was established before 1785. Because in 1785, the Continental Congress said, okay, we've got a plan for everything that will happen from now on. And this will organize westward expansion and manifest destiny all the way to the West Coast. Everything will be laid out according to the Roman grid, and will mandate the economic and political infrastructure, and the grid will be the geography of it. But the sort of urge that will pervade all of it is that a few people will decide how everyone else will live. Whether it's sort of more historic centers, where you've had to, if you have a public square, it's because somebody put it in, or suburbs, notice for yourself, just think of your own experience in our country. How many public squares are there in neighborhoods? I don't know, you might have read these statistics that Americans have 10 times more crime across the board, or rather evidence of urban strife than other places that are more walkable and talkable and are characterized by gathering places. When you save your money and you go to visit these older countries, maybe you go to your own roots, your own ancestry. Go back to that place, you'll find that there's a village center. But when you come back to your neighborhood, you'll probably find that there isn't. Unless somebody cared to make one. Lately, people are like, oh my God, we have no public square. There's nowhere to even know the people that we live among, our neighbors. No wonder people feel so isolated. Yeah, and sociologists in universities and in so many other settings are writing articles constantly trying to help us understand that there's a relationship between the fact that we don't have places to gather and the fact that we feel isolated and we don't talk to each other, and then we act out violence against each other. And that's just one issue. But it's extremely vital, because I don't think a sustainable society works like that. I mean, empires always fall, and that's the behavior of empires. For a few people say, maybe we should design how everyone else lives and isolate them by design so that then they can't get together and even figure out what's happened to them, and then we can exploit them constantly. That's how empires go, and then that's why they fall. Because for one thing, you're disenfranchising the vast majority of the population. You don't tap into their intelligence. That means that if they have local problems, their local intelligence and their local experience doesn't get to engage those issues and solve them and meet them. I'm so tired of waking up every day to the same problems, you know, over and over again. We know the root causes of so many things. And we are always advocating and protesting, writing petitions and letters. And I'm pretty convinced at this point, with all the work that we've done to retrofit communities across the continent with gathering places and all the good things that have come from that, I'm pretty sure that all the solutions are really, I mean, the problems that we experience directly in our own families, the solutions are also right there as well. They're actually in our lap, they're in our hands. But as long as we go around thinking that we're alone in the world, you know, we never get practice in speaking and listening. Like, we don't get practice listening, except to maybe the TV, but we don't really listen to each other. You know, you notice in a cafe, you'll overhear people talking, and they're just like, my story, no affirmation, my story, no affirmation. Everyone's like telling their awesomest stories, but nobody's like, oh really, tell me more. You know, unless you're in a really healthy place somehow. We're desperate to be heard, and we get so little practice actually being heard and really listening to each other. This is a function of our isolation. So a lot of things coming out of our isolation. We don't tend to see these problems in the relationship, though. We tend to see them as separate issues. I don't know, that doesn't surprise me. My parents are still trying to figure out what the heck I'm doing with my life. They're like, but we helped you get a degree. Like, why aren't you doing that degree? It's because I took off my leash. You know, I took off my collar at a certain point. And I was like, you know what, I'm a citizen of the planet, first of all. That supersedes everything. That means I have certain responsibilities and also birthrights and opportunities. Like, if I want to gather with my community, no one will stop us. That kind of attitude. But people have a hard time figuring out what you're doing when you're doing placemaking or community building, because that's where you pull all these separate pieces together. But people are used to thinking in terms of being an accountant, being a realtor, being a caregiver, being a builder or something like that. But a placemaker is a person who kind of is starting to see that economy has to relate to ecology. And somehow building community is related to stewardship and mentorship, certainly related to education, and definitely related to our political infrastructure. And so, you know, basically they start to see the pieces relate. And when you do a project on a community level, you get practice in how all of these things fall together so naturally. In fact, you know, placemaking is really where you take all the separate broken pieces of your community and you pull them together into something that unifies them. And it becomes so simple and elegant, you almost can't describe it to someone who's used to a world where everything's separate. You know, tell me what you do in terms of your job description, because I can't relate to a cultural change agent. You know, a cultural change agent is one where, like, I'm not waiting around for an alternative economy, you know? I'm going to build community with garbage if I have to. And at that point, you're activating social capital, and people are using their natural capital. And in the end, you may not need any forms of economic capital, because the ones that are most vital to community building aren't money anyway, you know? And as you're activating people to build something as meager as a little bench or a little library, or taking over the streets, as I'll show you today, you're automatically doing a lot of the things that you wish would happen in the world. I mean, there's a political aspect to it, for one thing. Because people are sitting down to share food and speak and listen with each other, you're actually practicing the most vital, you're actually activating the very grassroots tips of a democracy there. Because really, I think democracy is place-based. It connotates a unit of people where they live, doing things together, not just voting and then going back to work, but actually undertaking ideas and manifesting them together that represent their values and reflect their sense of who they are. So we're not doing that, you know? We don't even know what's happening to us. Like, we get up in the morning, we leave the home zone to traverse the landscape to go to the work zone, which disintegrates community automatically, because it's through working with people that are proximate to you and having common work and play that you actually build community. I mean, that's how we did it for thousands upon thousands of years, and then more lately, we wake up in the home zone, getting ready to go to the work zone, and we don't even know that we've been zoned. Why is it that all across the country it works exactly the same way? Why is it that all across the country, every single neighborhood, except a few, are missing gathering places? Why do we all feel like we have no voice, and we have to go advocate to somebody that we've never even met, you know, just to slow traffic in our neighborhood to protect our little sister from being run over by a car? What's going on here? Did any of us at any point ever say, hey, this is great, how about we not have any power anymore? Awesome. That would be your last vote, you know? But there was never such a vote, so what's going on? Dave, can we have the lights down? Something went around, I just want to mention this before we go any farther. These are invitations to come to Portland. We have a 10-day placemaking festival that happens from May 29th to June 7th this year. It'll be the 15th year. We usually have about 20 to 40 projects all happening simultaneously across the city. People are organizing with their neighbors for months, figuring out what they're going to do, and then for 10 days they just blast. You know, installing rain gardens, water catchment systems, taking streets and turning them into public squares, basically bringing people back together so that they can practice their power. Okay. Well, before we get into that, I want to show you a little bit of stuff from other countries. Speaking of other places, it's been relatively recent that we somehow have forgotten that we used to live in or near a village heart. You know, where the great storytelling tree would be located, this place where all the pathways converge, and so everybody kind of meets each other organically every day. Those of you who have traveled know what I'm talking about if you've gone to older countries that predate the grid. This is an image looking up from deep within the earth. It's looking up from within a well. And I'm starting with this because, you know, these days people are talking a lot about the commons. The fact that various forms of commons are being privatized. Like Vandana Shiva is fighting against the privatization of genetics, of seeds. All kinds of people are fighting against the privatization of water and even in some ways of air. You know, some of you know about the history of the Enclosure Act, which has so profoundly impacted Western society when what was common land became privatized, and suddenly we had to work our whole life just to pay for a place to live. That got started at some point. That has not always been with us. But looking up from within the earth here, up toward the surface, we're looking up from within a water commons. The people who built this thing had experienced a series of severe droughts in this area called Umbria in Italy. And they realized that they needed to have a source of water even when there were dry seasons, extended dry seasons. So they started to blast through the rock with their picks. They didn't have explosives. And they knew that by the time they got down to the bottom of this hole and then built this fabulous well with double helix stairways that go like this, so that donkeys can come down one way to get water, and then donkeys can carry water going back the other way, with all these windows that illuminate the ramps. They knew that they would die before this was done, and they did it for the sake of the future, because talk about commons. They had a sense of commonality with the children and the future generations who weren't even born yet. That's how strongly they felt about it. Our people must persist. That's pretty incredible. You know, they weren't even necessarily getting anything for this. The whole village was working on it together. So that's my mom is kind of, that's a photograph of my mom. She goes around exploring ancient sort of ancient sites to try to understand how people thought and saw and acted differently in some past, where maybe they had a greater sense of something in common. So here we are coming through a tunnel in a mountain. We're coming out the other side, sort of like the tunnels of, like, I don't know, Moria or something from The Hobbit. We kind of went through this mountain, we came out the other side, and we're looking for this certain tomb. And we're looking for a circle and a hole in a wall. We're on the island of Sardinia here. We found it, this ancient circle in this little hole. And then you go through the hole, you have to get on your belly, and you come through the other side, and it's a gigantic chamber called the Tomb of the Giant. When archaeologists first saw this, they thought, well, these people must have been huge, because this is a burial chamber. And, I mean, according to their individuated sense of things, of course everyone is buried separately. But in this society, everybody knew that they would be buried, they'd be interred with the past generations, and then the future generations would join them. And like hundreds of thousands of people would be laid in here over time, all laying there together, because they would always be together. Their sense of sort of cosmological structure and mythology held that everything's a community. This was before monotheism. Monotheism really comes from empire. Before that, people were seeing in terms of community in all things, relationships, relational networks in all things. So of course they would want to be buried together. But coming in and out of that hole on a daily basis were the spirits of their people who were always interacting with them. They had this sort of same sense about this notion of hell, except for them, it was the idea of the womb of regeneration, that when you died, you would actually go into the ground and come out of it again in multiple cycles of lifetime. There was no punitive order to the universe. And in fact, when you look at the sides of the tomb, there's inscriptions and graphics that show them joyfully diving down into the ground. Like if you said to them, are you going to hell? They'd be like, hell yes. Are you crazy? Of course. How else am I going to regenerate? One thing that was cool, I talk about regenerative, I talk about a sustainable society. It really helps to realize that you're on a regenerative planet. And then to celebrate that, and to mythologize it, and ritualize it, and integrate it into every way that you see and things that you do. For us, trying to become sustainable, the biggest problem isn't the planet, it's us. Like the planet is totally on our side, All of our past generations are on our side. I mean, there was a time before we could even speak, we got that worked out. There was a time before we even had thumbs, we got that worked out. What is wrong with this generation? We're like, oh no, the world's going to end, oh no, but we have freaking thumbs and language. Like, all we have to do is become creative and stop submitting to this idea that we are separate, we're alone, it's hopeless, we have no power. That's absurd. Okay, so up above this cave, we were scrambling around, like looking for other sort of evidence of cultural expression. We found this ancient symbol of the village. Did you know that the mandala is actually a symbol of the village? It shows pathways converging at a center, and then there's this kind of circle which defines the perimeter. Of course, that's talking about the four directions. It's basically like a medicine wheel, but it's also saying that the village begins with an intersection of people's pathways. And that's what Piazza is. It's simply an intersection where so much stuff is happening that they have to widen it to make it big enough for people to sell produce, to dance, to fight, have disagreements, or whatever. If you have enough of that going on, you need a pretty big place. But it always happens at the convergence of pathways, and then the village develops around it. And that's basically an urban pattern. So elsewhere on Sardinia, there are 6,000 of these vertical villages with multiple towers, and again, double helix stairways around stacked circular chambers. And the great meeting spaces are configured around these chalices of water, so they would sit there deliberating around a bowl of water, because what they were into was celebrating the elements and the fact of their realities. It's a fantastic, amazing thing to go to a place like this and see, like, my God, all of our present assumptions are probably the perceptual basis of an unsustainable society. And ones that persist for thousands of years tend to see and build even in terms of circularity, create social structures of interconnection. And of course, they're place-based. This is one of these awesome water temples. They would go in and sit in this circular configuration around this bowl of water, and then these water spouts would somehow be dumping hot water on them, and then they're having a meeting at the same time. I don't know, they must not have, it was more of an oral society, I suppose. No papers. I think every neighborhood needs one of these. This is an underground water temple. And it's in the shape of the goddess Tanit. Literally, there's this, her body goes like this, rah! And she has this skirt, and the stairway is in the shape of a triangle, and you descend down her skirt to this fabulous portal that's shaped about like this before you go into the womb space, which is where the temple is. And the seats are underwater. You sit in water up to about here, waiting for the rising sun of the solstice to send a beam of light into the earth. And then there was some kind of party that happened at that point. But like she's this, representation of a metaphor, really, that the earth is regenerative like a mother is regenerative. And they would set up this alignment with this inseminating force of the sun that had a masculine association. There are 28 of these things. These are like Stonehenges, all over the island. The only reason these things exist is because this island is so close to Rome that they didn't want to build city-states there that would claim the island for themselves. They wanted to grow food all over Sardinia to feed Rome. So you go there, and there's thousands upon thousands, like more than 7,000 major megalithic, sort of so-called pagan structures, pagan being the Roman word for everyone else. So of course they would call themselves pagan. I think every neighborhood needs one of these for people to sit around and have a deeper appreciation for their reality. This is a fabulous feature, though. Up above the stairway, on the ceiling, is the stairway of their ancestors that come and go on a daily basis in and out of the water temple on the ceiling. Like, that's how they saw it. I don't know, do you think that they had crime statistics and health problems like we do? Probably not. They would have treated each other very differently. Okay, so here we are, heading to Portland on the plane. Now, you might have heard of Portland. It's a rather outrageous place these days. It's the one major city where citizen participation is actually increasing dramatically, and in all other major cities it's actually in decline. People are increasingly disengaged. But something tremendous has happened in Portland, kind of all over the social context. And just for instance, like I get on a plane going to Portland, Oregon, and I notice that people are wide-eyed, they're talking to each other, they're interacting with other people, but they're just meeting for the first time, they're not all closed down. Like, even going back to their town, they have a sense of community with each other. So I'm coming in this airplane, I get to my seat, and I'm excited because I'm about to meet a bunch of people from Portland. So I'm getting to my seat, and this young woman picks up my seatbelt and picks it up. She picks it up and she says, "Let me make it easier for you." And I sit down on my seat, and then she lays it across my lap and introduces herself. And the guy on the other side of me offers me some gum. And we're striking up a conversation, and that's just how it's going. And then somebody behind us actually passes over the back of the seat a plate of cookies. Not out of the package either, and it has a little sign on it that says, "Welcome home." So we each take a cookie. And I've never seen that before, but I mean, a lot of Portlanders will see something like that and they'll say, I'm doing that next time, for sure. And that's how the whole city is rolling right now. Like, you'll see business owners adopting other business owners' incredible creative strategies for somehow undertaking a sustainable enterprise. That happens for sure. But you see crazy, outrageous behavior in the streets where people are like inspired and then they emulate each other. They get their kids involved. You just have to come and see it. But you'll notice right away, like, wow, there are lots and lots of people biking all over the place. It's a great bike infrastructure. Wow, down that street there's as much space for bikes as there is for cars. Boy, there's a lot of trees around here. You start looking around and you see outrageous evidence of what's been going on. But it's as if we actually think the town is ours. It's as if we feel like the political structure belongs to us. You should see who we put in office. You should see the choices that they're making. Like this, to legalize the transformation of street intersections all over the city. All 95 neighborhoods can transform as many street intersections as they want all across their neighborhood for free. Okay, so you register for a free permit, and that means that the city gives you free insurance. So you just get a permit. But in about 2 weeks, we're actually passing a new ordinance that lets little free libraries go all over the city, at least one on every block face, 4 per block. You don't even have to tell the city that you've done it. You don't even have to get a permit anymore. You just do it and you're insured. Because there's so many awesome outcomes from engaging youth to do this stuff. These things, like, we've learned so much about the nature of people. Like, people come here and they're like, "Oh my gosh, What about all the vandalism that must happen? This is what you do so you don't have vandalism. It doesn't happen. Like, why does vandalism happen? Because you're not engaging kids, basically, to be creative and to create reflections and expression and symbols and metaphors in the public commons. Like, we're supposed to be doing that. And the healthiest communities in the world are the ones that accommodate that. And the most repressive, and then reactive societies don't permit it. So here we are doing this in a conventional neighborhood. American Journal of Public Health has published all these studies that say, oh my gosh, people are losing weight. They actually get outside of their houses and interact with other people. How interesting, they're tearing up their yards and putting in gardens everywhere. How interesting, they're creating all these other forms of gathering places. Oh my gosh, look at the children on the interior of the blocks all around here. They're like digging tunnels under fences and taking down fences, and all these behaviors because adults are changing. So they have this social catalyst that they designed and they created, they installed. And the ordinance in Portland that lets people do this basically says, it's yours. We've realized that without a field of creative participation, every community is broken by design. Everyone will be isolated without such a place. And it isn't just the place, it's the process of engagement and the fact of local ownership. This kind of idea is taking endless forms in the city. This is just one. This is Free Geek. It's the world's leading facility for building community through taking just old broken computer parts and putting them back together into new computers. You can't even buy a computer here. This is totally focused on social justice. The only way you can get a freaking Free Geek computer is if you work 8 hours, then you get your own free computer. And you've been trained in how to use the computer and how to maintain it. So you build community through the technology. That's magic. Like, our society is all about somehow figuring out how to get a bunch of stuff done by getting some people to do work that we pay them very little for. So in that case, you use design really as a means for personal profit and not for building community. Instead of that, going to the way that we did it for thousands and thousands of years before the rise of empire, you use design as a means to build community. Like a Native American elder once told me, it's kind of the same thing. An unsustainable society and a sustainable society, both sets of people get up in the morning and they've got some stuff to do. But in a sustainable culture, you start off by saying, I notice we have some disengaged youth that we need to mentor. Maybe we should get some stuff done. And it's about that simple. Here's another example. Portlanders, some Portlanders have figured out that they're spending most of their time in their activism talking around the table, figuring out how they're going to fund and get permission and actually do something before they do it. Not this group of Portlanders. About 5% of the time is spent on beer, and the rest of the time is spent planting edibles in damaged landscapes all over the city, like in this public park, without permission. They're just like, there's all these nurse logs up there without anything to nurse. Let's bring up some huckleberries and some inoculated mushroom logs and get started. So they meet at about 4 in the morning and they organize to go out into these damaged landscapes and just get it done. But what this group didn't realize was that along for the ride this morning was one of the founding employees of Microsoft who had millions of dollars and lots of friends with lots of resources looking for something that would be like the pressure point where they could apply their resources. So for our friend Narendra, this is his first big experiment. It's a regenerative farm in southwest Portland, 65 acres. It's basically integrating biodynamic and permaculture principles into what is mostly a perennial farm. There's a lot to say about this, but there's this on-site sort of farm manager village made of straw bale and cob buildings that are all passive solar. So kind of trying to exemplify the best, most passive principles that require the least amount of energy. So these sorts of ideas are happening on all sorts of scales, where there's people saying, no, we will plant without asking permission. Or we will undertake this massive project to try to model a new way of agriculture. This is the design office where I work. It's on the corner of these 2 streets in Portland, and we have this food forest around us, surrounded by 84 varieties of edibles that shade our storefront windows and shade the concrete. So we're actually fighting the urban heat island effect at the same time as we're growing edibles and pollinators to try to support distressed bee populations and other insects, while we're also using passive techniques to heat and cool our building without having to use any energy from an external source. This is the rebuilding center at our United Villages, and this group of people decided to just take garbage out of the waste stream, build a facility where people could come into the building. Like, it's made entirely out of recycled and natural materials. And when you go inside, it's filled with other stuff that they've redirected from the waste stream. They've fixed it up and they've made it available for you to buy for pennies on the dollar compared to Lowe's or Home Depot. And yet everyone who works at this place gets paid way more than the people in Lowe's and Home Depot. And the whole place begins with the fact that they run it. They all have power together. Everyone gets to make decisions and have some sense of authority in this place, collaborative authority with other people. They all come from within walking distance, so nobody commutes and has a carbon footprint just by getting to work and going home. So that's awesome. They all get, living wages and full health and dental benefits that cover their entire families. This is an incredible thing. It's really applying permaculture to a business model, but the idea is to, support the resurging economy of this distressed part of town as they model, a thoroughly sustainable approach to economics and community building. This is looking at other parts of the building, thousands of windows repurposed that would have gone into the waste stream. This is part of the interior of the building, so really creative reuse, using doors and fence boards for flooring, for instance. This is their administrative office. You open a door and a window to get into the different parts of the office. Thanks for that intermission. This is the main entrance into the building. It's the third permitted use of cob in a commercial setting in the United States. And this was built by people within 2 blocks. They built it in 10 days and they were fed by the restaurants up and down the street across from this building. So all these different forms of using the stuff that we do as a means to build community. Personally, as a person with an architecture office, I am not interested at all in ordinary design and construction. If somebody comes in and they're only interested in making money, I send them out the door. We can't even afford to do that kind of work anymore in this world. If they're bringing us a project as a means to build community, then we'll take the work and we'll collaborate with them and meet them wherever they're ready to start. And here's one of the best examples. This is the Capaces Institute. It's a training facility that has been created by the Lakeman organization, which is founded by Cesar Chavez, workers' rights organization. So they decided in the process of designing this building that they weren't just going to fight for or fight against, that they were actually going to take the lead in terms of green design and create the most energy efficient office building in the country, with walls that are like 4 times thicker than usual, than code required, like R130 ceilings, for instance. And they would do this super expensive building for pennies because they would start training their youth. Like, this is a training facility for teaching youth about public speaking and organizing and fundraising and all these other things that are important. But they started by teaching the kids how to hammer, how to lift stuff, how to work with each other to build the building. So they really built it through the building of their youth's capacity from the start. And that's the sort of stuff we're interested in doing. And that's the sort of stuff that won't get torn down, that will last and be built upon into the future. Here's another one. This is just a postage stamp size sort of infill project. It's the smallest co-housing community. It's like a little eco-village in Portland on a little sort of extra wide lot, but it has 4 buildings on it. They're all owned by separate families, and then they all collectively own the gardens and pathways and bike corral and community building and the piazza and the gardens and all this stuff. Super affordable, made out of natural recycled materials. So even this, is a way of building community through stuff. And this was actually done by a developer collaborating with the Progressive Bank. This is the house. This is a design for the house of the chairman of the Democratic Party in Portland, Oregon. He wanted a food forest that he could share with his neighbors to grow food, but also building materials. So he's got timber, bamboo going, and trees for coppicing as well. So the political establishment getting into some... food forests are not radical. Permaculture is not radical. It's basic. We need to redefine radical. Get way more radical. This is something that the city of Portland, because we are so creative in the work that we do, our horizons have gone farther forward, receded farther from us. We've gone to the ordinary horizon where people are used to saying, oh, that's impossible. We do impossible every day in Portland. So our horizons are way more interesting and wonderful. So this building, for instance, the city government actually said, could we actually create a building that builds community like we've never seen before and actually creates more energy and somehow more surplus for the community than it absorbs? Can we do that? So that they supported this regional summit of all these visionaries to come together And because we're out there working with kids, making little free libraries and doing all these unheard things and designing radical things like the Capacity Institute, they hand us this project. So how are you going to expand your horizons? And how are you going to do the things that you never even imagined were possible unless you do the things that you see are within your reach to try? Like, just start, and you'll see that as soon as you start, new horizons open for you. Here's another wonderful thing. I never imagined that I would be able to work with such a process as this, working with kids in this placemaking project. For some reason, there was this group of kids in the Metropolitan Learning Center who just had to have a gathering place that cast shadows on itself. And the way that the shadows work is they touch these planets at certain times of the year, at certain times of day. And when the shadow of something touches the middle of, say, Jupiter, it's like Rosa Parks' birthday moment, and then there's this huge freaking party. These kids would not leave their sustainability teacher alone in their high school. They're like, no, if we're going to be a sustainable society, there must be a place where people can track shadows and notice the time of the day and the year, like they understand the tilting of the planet. Otherwise, how are we going to get there? We need a place that doesn't cost money for people to sit. So they kept bugging their teacher, and their teacher invited some, progressive creative designers to come in, myself and some other people, and we sat with them, and we listened to them, and we ended up manifesting this. There was a huge political fight, the whole school got involved, the whole neighborhood got involved, and we ended up calling this Babyhenge. Stonehenge was built over about 1,500 years' time, and it started with a little tiny circle like this. So the kids are like, well, we got to get started, We're going to have a Stonehenge around here, we need to get going. So it's sort of a 1,500-year plan for this part of the city. This is Bay City, Oregon. It's a small town on the coast. What I'm talking about is creative engagement. People speaking and listening and figuring out how to actually work with each other. It's called democracy, or really it's called anarchy. When nobody's telling you what to do, but you're figuring out together what to do, that's where you're creating culture, and you don't have a sort of archy or structure or a patriarchy over you. It tends to be characterized by expressions of place all over around you. So this town revolutionized itself. It has this 20-year vision plan, and they immediately got started by engaging kids, building skate parks, and crazy, like sky-jumping bike parks and pathways and stuff. This is an extension of Pacific University, the nation's first permaculture campus, 3 acres in this little university west of Portland. And this, we drew it up, but it was after lots and lots of workshopping and listening, basically design charrettes, to figure out what the local community and the university staff and the students wanted to do on this site. So there's market gardens, there's habitat restoration, there's riparian sort of interventions, and lots of forest gardening. Every surface, roof surface is water catchment, and there are water treatment facilities, and basically deciding that they're going to master plan everything that they can imagine is possible, even if it isn't legal yet, and then get to the legal part as they implement each piece. There's this dome-shaped willow dome at the intersection of forest pathways, just by sticking willow into the ground and then weaving it as it grows into this space for sitting. So you're sitting there inside as these birds are kind of coming and going in their nests above your head. Just amazing. This giant meadow becomes a series of bioswales to keep water on the site so it doesn't sort of flow off and carry silt with it into the local riverway. So a lot of ecological strategies merging with the creation of gathering places. And then this other structure here is an outdoor classroom built by the students as a place to teach and learn outside. So every one of the things we're doing is basically taking this thing that you normally have to go to college to learn. Like here's Carl Abbott. A lot of people in the city love him because he's kind of like the Gandalf of urban planning in Portland. Everybody in Portland is all about urban planning and urban design. They really want the city to work. So here's the dean of everybody, and he's saying, remember, the city's supposed to help you talk. Duh. We have to pay thousands of dollars to learn that. Other villages in Africa, or throughout Asia, you get to grow up in that truth. You don't even need words for it because it's your daily experience to live in a village where people are interacting with each other constantly as they build community by living. Okay, so I'm raising that because that's something that we're working on all the time. We're also working on climate change, and it may not look like it to you because you see so much art along with the ecology. But we're taking this seriously, this diagram that was released in 2009 by the Consensus of Climate Scientists, the vast consensus. where they said we have about 10 years to reduce our emissions across the planet by 90%, and for North America by 98%. We're going to have 2% of what we're doing now to work with by 2019, they said, 2020-ish. Otherwise, the systems, so many different phasing systems like pollinators and blossoming that needs to be in sync if you're going to have things like apples or walnuts. If those things go out of sync, are you going to be able to eat? Like long before the oceans rise, we may not even be able to eat the perennial crops that we're relying on now. So we're looking at the fact that we must have the gathering places that are fundamental to human habitat. And at the same time, we must somehow design within this huge constraint that we've never faced before. Actually, for those of us that are working on this in Portland, this is the most propitious moment, most awesome design constraints that actually will force us to reintegrate all these pieces that can never be solved separately. Like, we have to design holistically. If you want social justice, you must have ecological sustainability at the same time. And your strategy for accomplishing either one has to integrate the considerations for all these other pieces. You'll just see this as we go forward, how this works. But for instance, we're looking at the fact that our living environment is disintegrated. For instance, this woman who lives in the black square here, she travels around the city in this huge radius, having this massive impact just to go for food, just to get some shoes, just to pick up her child, you know, just to go visit some friends. She's a roofer. She travels all across the city to fix roofs with other people without realizing that right where she lives, there are people who need their roof fixed, but nobody knows each other, you know, so why would they even talk? This is characteristic of the whole country, whether it's less dense or more dense. Everybody leaves where they live, and they don't realize at the same time that they're surrounded by the muscle and the power and the talent all around them that powers the entire society, and everyone's feeling like isolated from each other. They don't realize that right next door there's a roof to fix, or right next door there's a doctor and they're sick. Okay, so why is it happening like this? Lizzie Magie was this brilliant young woman at the beginning of the last century who invented the game Monopoly as a way to help people living in the USA and Canada to actually play their reality as a game so that they might understand why this is happening. So you know in Monopoly, the only form of commons is a jail and a parking lot, right? As you go around a few times, you're sitting there like building a few houses, but you're like, damn, if I could just get one more house, I could tear them all down and put in a taller, bigger thing, you know? And you're like, you don't even realize you're playing gentrification as if that's fun, you know? But as you tear down those houses, look at all those displaced families, like listen closely. They're like, oh no, we'll have to get other jobs, and what about our children? All our social relationships are dissipating again, you know? But that's how the grid works, this ubiquitous thing that is imposed violently over the lands of Native people every single time. For me, my big epiphany around these issues was when a Native man looked me in the eyes. He's like, oh, you're apologizing to me? Because I had been. I was crying. He's like, we're the lucky ones, because at least we know who we are. You don't even realize that your village was destroyed so long ago, you don't even know the story. I was like, and I felt something inside, something stirred. I didn't really understand. And he said, when you get home, go to the closest street intersection. He was explaining to me about the grid. This is a Mayan guy. He was explaining to me about the grid. He's like, go home and stand in the street intersection and look as far as you can in every direction and notice that everything's long, straight, and flat. Then go to another intersection a block away and notice it's exactly the same. Then go to another city and notice it's exactly the same. And then realize that you're within a colonial infrastructure. You know, and then try to learn when the story of your family and those lines came together, and then you'll realize who you are. Because that's when you stopped having a choice anymore. And that story applies to all of us. I went around for like 7 years asking Indigenous societies, like, what's wrong with me? Like, I got out of architecture school and I went to work as an architect in this big corporate firm. And after 3 years of being there was this huge corporate, there was this huge toxic waste cover-up on the site. And everyone in my office was like, haha, the government inspectors will never know about it. And I was like, whoa, I mean, I've got white skin and a white shirt and a tie, and that just means that I'm in on it? Like, you're just assuming that we can all break federal law and toxify? Like, this site was right on the edge of the major waterway, the Willamette River that runs through Portland, Oregon, and we were going to be leaching this stuff out to go into the fish that would poison our children, but we didn't care because we just want money? I mean, is that what we're doing? So I quit that very day that happened. I traveled for like 7 years, just going around asking Native people, like, what's wrong with my people? And they're like, that's so great, you know, have a seat, you know, let's take a few days. I was like, what's wrong with me? And this one time I really was crying. This guy holds my face in his hands. He's like, you do not understand. Like, we are part of one great story. And it's as if this tsunami has washed over humanity. This great forgetting has happened. And we're all part of this great cause. And it's such a context of confusion. And then he started to explain the grid and colonialism to me. Okay, so this is the strategy we're working on. Enable people to be a place-based community again. And not to say, oh, you can't go out of your neighborhood. No, it's to say, we will restore every single neighborhood with as many gathering places as people freaking want, and design it according to the things that are valuable and important to them, and make it look like what they think they need, you know, and we'll support them. You know, I'm saying we, because I identify with my whole city now. But I help people do what they want to do, and that's really the key to all of this. And as it spreads to all these other cities across the country, as it has, and into Canada and other places, it's because that's the one thing that is transferable. You have your own power. You do what you will where you live. And let's unmake this unsustainable reality. So this little circle is just saying, hey, maybe this woman could know the people around her and fix the roofs of the people in the working class neighborhood right where she lives, because none of them have enough money. There's lots of holes in roofs all around her. And there are people with all the skills and talents that fit together. When you leave, they fit together. They could fit together right where you live. And if you worked with and played with and built community with the people right where you live, it would make your streets safer. You would slow down your cars. And there's all these other things that would change as well, and it would massively impact the issues related to climate change. Because maybe you would be using your body to move around instead of burning fossil fuels. And then maybe you'd have a greater sense of power and more hope, and maybe you would make choices differently, and maybe you wouldn't submit to the same things that you've been putting up with your whole life. So this is the concept. It's to say that in the colonial grid that has nullified the gathering place where our pathways come together, to say, no, that is a node of connection, not just a place where you run into someone else with your car. Isn't it interesting? Like, an intersection is such a place of convergence that it is where you'll run into someone with your car, because it's so inherently a place where people come together. I think that's a powerful thing to think about. But what if you're out of your car and it becomes a space that you have a sense of ownership with? So when we did this the first time, we had this deep realization that places were missing. Our neighborhood tried to get the Department of Transportation to work with us. They said, no way, you can't take an intersection and turn it into a public square. That's impossible. And besides, that's public space, so nobody can use it. You're like, wait a second, this has been done all over the world, and besides, that is public space, and we're the public. And they're like, oh, you're so frustrating. But just be quiet because you have no power. And we're like, wait, this is our neighborhood. They're like, why don't you just go back, and just give up? And we're like, we are here. There's nowhere for us to go. The issues are what we live with. Anyway, it was a ridiculous conversation, and we did it anyway. We broke the law, and within 3 months it was changed for everyone in the city to be able to do this to as many places as they want. And that's because we got to say to the City Council, look, United States of America, highest rates of violence connected to isolation, lowest number of gathering places of all. And they unanimously legalized the transformation of streets. But what we didn't show them was this. This is what we call the sacred napkin of world peace. This is where the initial organizers become this thing called city repair. And this is our secret master plan. Like the little grid there with the green circles around it and radiating lines, that's Portland, Oregon. And we're basically saying we will act up in the most epiphanous, beautiful way and inspire everybody else throughout the network of city-states in the world to take back their place as well. So really, it's a lot like Occupy, except you're not going downtown so much as you're just occupying where you live in a whole different way. Yards become gardens, streets become gathering places, neighbors become friends, that kind of thing. So, one of the most astute people talking about placemaking issues in the world is James Howard Kunstler. And he is saying that our mute society, where we're more afraid of public speaking than we are of death, we can't even listen for more than 15 seconds before we disengage. He's like, we desperately need gathering places in order to be able to reconnect as a people, but it may be too late. Like, we don't have the patience, we don't have the time. You know, we've lost all these social patterns with each other. So we thought, well, you might be right, James, but he probably hasn't talked to second grade girls yet, so we should go check with them. You know, go talk to anybody who hasn't been taught yet that things are impossible in their life that they can imagine. Go sit with them and ask them what they think. So we sat down with these girls and we brought these models of street intersections. And so we said, girls, adults all across the country, millions of them, can't seem to figure out how to slow traffic, engage kids, make the streets safer, help people be more responsible with each other and more creative. And this little girl on the lower right there, she's like, really? Really, you don't know? You don't know how to do that? So she makes this little red circle and she lays it down. She's like, that represents a pony ride. And we're like, okay, well, what about that? And she's like, get a bunch of ponies in the streets, and I guarantee you all the cars are going to stop. People are going to get out of the cars, they're going to want to ride those ponies, they're going to want to pet those ponies, and then on all the corners you can have a family-sized, like you can have a pool and some chairs and a kid's clubhouse and a sandbox and a snowman, for God's sake. And her friend says, I have such a better idea than that. I know for sure if we have an ice cream parlor right in the middle of the street, tables and chairs on all the corners, we can have a family-sized skateboard and everyone can skate together and a climbing arch. Everyone's going to start talking and getting along and like, I mean, this is totally true. You know, but you couldn't ask adults to do this because they'd be like, well, what are the rules? What's the paradigm that we're contained in presently? What's the box look like from within? You know, where are the windows? Oh, they're closed, darn. You know? No, the kids are like, you need to slow cars. Well, then we need some monkeys on bungee cords, for God's sake. You know? And it would work. Okay, anyway, they're totally right. And what they're talking about is the stuff that you go to other countries to visit. Yeah, the most awesome gathering places in the world are animated and defined by all these interesting things that happen on the edges, and then the center is basically utilized for the most interesting and wonderful activities. Yeah, where living and working is not disintegrated, where people come outside and just by walking back and forth to get bread or to go visit a friend to build community because they're interacting and seeing each other as they move throughout the public commons. And this is a street. Like, notice there's a car going through the street, but this person is like, oh, these are my people. I won't kill them. You know, I won't run them down. They're connected to my family for generations. Yeah, this is the Passeggiata in Italy. It's going on right now. It goes on every single day. It's, you know, instead of TV, they have each other, and then they live in these incredible geomorphic villages that actually work like the human body, where all the pieces are in place to facilitate interaction. Geomorphic villages are places where people arrive at a beautiful place and then they adapt their habitat to the geography and the climate conditions. This kind of diagram applies just as surely as it does to an ancient Celtic village as it does to a contemporary European village that has medieval origins or a present-day African village. Convergence points wherever pathways converge. Like this Dogon village in Mali that so many people love to go visit, where you'll see this robust, incredible, irrepressible creative expression every day and then cyclically every year. Notice that the block structure is essentially circular. Like, you couldn't come along to these people and say, oh no, you must live in squares now. No, you must all have isolated and separate interests. Where the bank, you have to pay the bank, you know, for 30 years just to have a roof over your head. Like, no way, you would have to kill them. Which is what empires do to people like these. Like, oh, you won't do what we tell you, and you die. You know? Every time. I just think this is fascinating. Like, as soon as you actually have a human expression that is not within a hierarchy, but comes from the guts of people together, tuned by grandmothers and grandfathers for millennia, like this, you know, integrating their knowledge all the time. Like, oh, there's a grandmother who doesn't have a bench. She needs at least 3 benches between where she lives and where she goes to get her grain. Kids, fan out and get those benches installed this morning. No permits, no fundraising, they just get it done. Like, that's some serious freedom. Well, it's just fascinating how that corresponds rather exactly to a mycelial network infrastructure that underlies a forest floor by which all of these plant communities are interconnected. And the mycelia actually sends water and nutrients specifically to certain specific plants. It's actually an intelligence highway working rather like a village. Something about, this is what earthlings do. For those of us who live in the grid, we're always like, oh, where did we come from? Maybe another planet. Maybe the Pleiades. There's people who have theories about that. I don't think so, because I notice that as soon as people have their own power where they live, they start to act like nature. It's pretty special. Well, it's just about as simple as this. If you actually stand and look each other in the eye without fear in a circle, the village reveals itself to you. Like it just sort of bursts into flames in between you. It regenerates in your feelings. And that's proof that the village isn't made out of stuff. We are the village. You're a villager walking around. You're a place-based cultural agent all the time if you choose to be. Which takes me to this favorite metaphor, the revolt of the pawns. Okay, so you know how old-fashioned chess works? It's a game of kings. So the king never dies. Everybody else dies but the king, because it's a patriarchy, right? You sort of separate people by their superficial differences. You got some light ones over here, some dark ones over here. You practice a little warfare on the grid. So new chess starts off by assuming that the pawns, that the working class, all have skills and talents and names and families, and definitely there are community organizers in there, or permaculturists, community activists. So you start off going, all right, well, before the next game starts, the organizers come out to the center and they start talking, and they're like, I'm so sorry for what happened in the last game. We came out, we attacked you, and you attacked us. It was totally awful. We all killed each other. The tall, oppressive ones with funny hats attacked each other, and then, of course, the king survived. It's totally a patriarchy. So they trade sides, and they're talking to the other pawns. The organizers are saying, you guys are always talking about getting out of the box, thinking out of the box. Don't you realize we're in freaking boxes, you fools? And the pawns are like, but this is our job. We do what we're told. We can't question this. Well, how would we pay for our rectangle, our home? So they managed to get, fortunately, into small groups with facilitators here. They're sitting there talking about their abusive childhoods, and everyone's like, oh my God, I had no idea you were going through this too. Yes. My reality wasn't the only one about abuse and neglect, like everyone else. My God, we must have been isolated. So they go to the back row to confront their oppressors. They're like, hey, you guys are always taking more than your share. What is going on here? You don't even fund the arts? Are you crazy? So the pawns get pissed. Kick them off the board. Because these guys are totally defensive. They're like, who, us? We never took more than our share. They're lying, of course. And then the pawns, they haven't really fundamentally questioned the paradigm, so they end up, restating the same set of problems and attacking each other. So instead of that, since the 60s and 70s, where all these different issues started to rise and people started to join together, it started to look more like this. And the organizers are saying, hey, stop hitting, get out of your box, let's see if we can see each other's face. Oh, how interesting, it looks like a circle. Oh, kind of a commons in the middle, how interesting. Automatically, it creates itself. The village is being regenerated before their eyes. A little while later, it goes like this. I'm quite serious. What's the difference between an unsustainable society and a sustainable one? You might end up living in exactly the same place, but your behavior has changed. Instead of feeling like you're set against everyone, maybe suddenly you can realize that life becomes easier when you work with other people and you seek mutual benefit as the highest outcome of your work. Yeah, and then all these people are looking out for you, not just you looking out only for yourself. So these ponds, they had a harvest festival. We've got, they're sharing obviously even with the kings, which is kind of nice. But they've got 3 Asian pears and a squash. They've got a little rocket stove in there as well. We've got some furniture finally and a couple of hot tubs at the bottom in the image, and they've got this whole sort of regenerative landscape. All they've done is they've said, we have our power, we'll recreate the world right where we stand. And I think that's what we're talking about. Okay, that's what's happening in Portland. People are, this couple getting married here in the streets, they said, well, we just did this research and we just learned that people couldn't even get married in churches until 1512. That means a traditional wedding. For the thousands of years of human history, that was always in the center of the village, right in the middle of the commons. So that's what we're going to do. Do you think they're slowing traffic? Do you think that people are becoming safer here? Have they made some friends? These are people from blocks and blocks around, their neighbors as well as their family and friends, occupying the street for a street wedding, which is kind of happening all over the place in Portland. For us, a lot of this placemaking stuff got started out of the 60s and 70s, where people were saying, no, we must manifest change in the physical reality around us. We have to start creating places for people to communicate and talk. And it started with seizing this rooftop in downtown Portland, this 2-story parking garage. And all the big businesses downtown were trying to stop this from happening. The mayor actually at the time said, I can't let you create this public square. He said that to the broad public, because you'll gather it. And then you'll disagree with the power structure, and then you'll have a revolution. We're like, oh my God, that's such an awesome idea, Mayor. Thanks. So we organized painting the rooftop of this two-story parking garage. We were like, this is an awesome design, and we're going to tear this thing down and put it in this public square. The mayor showed up with his Mustang there, and he got out and he was yelling at people on the other side of the painting, and we painted his car while he was looking away. And then we threw him out of office so fast and replaced him with a guy that looks amazingly like Santa Claus. And everything started to change. Everything started to change. We broke the back of the corrupt old boy network that was just basically using the city as an extraction, a field for their own enrichment. So yeah, we built this public square, one of the most beautiful in all the world, but it was as if an acupuncturist had sort of touched the body of the whole region in the perfect spot, because suddenly all these other things started to happen. But no wonder. We finally had one place where time and space and life was not for sale, where everyone was like, oh, I can be there too? I don't have to pay to be there? What does that do even to your dreams? There's lots of stories I can tell you, but I can show you that we have the most bike commuters and the most bike lane miles by far of all cities. The most fabulous mass transit infrastructure that actually we've built with the money that was going to be used to build a freeway that was going to destroy Southeast Portland, and we sat in the streets and stopped that freeway and took the billions and instead built mass transit with it. The most green buildings, the most natural buildings, the most community gathering places, the most farmers markets of all cities by far. I mean, what's happening in Portland is so far surpassing the Renaissance because it's not relying on rich people giving money to certain artists like Leonardo. It's like everyone is an artist in their own life. Their life is this field for exhibition. This is in my neighborhood, and it's basically on the edge of this vast wildlife sanctuary. It's one of the biggest in the country, celebrating just local bird populations. This wildlife sanctuary was set aside by this guy his name is Mike Houck, and he is rather enormous, but we call him the Hulk or the Houck. Like sometimes you can have people that are so freaking powerful that everyone's just like, you are so cool and kind of scary cool that I will just agree with you. So he went around this huge sanctuary that was just a wetland. Maybe somebody would develop it someday, and he just put up signs saying, Oregon Department of Wildlife Refuge. And then signs were never taken down, and the state and the county and the city all decided to agree with Mike because he's so awesome. That's a short version of the story. The shortest distance between where food is grown and where it's consumed of all cities, like the urban agriculture infrastructure is tremendous. Come see it. We have this growth boundary around 3 counties where all 3 counties agreed to try to save farmland and forest land, and instead of just sprawling endlessly, constantly reinvest in the infrastructure of the city so it remains vital and robust. I mean, it's like, oh, I built a house, maybe I should patch the roof, instead of abandoning that house and just building some sprawl. Whoops. Okay. But I think the greatest evidence of the activation of our city is not just this, which happens every year where we set a new world record for most naked bike riders in the streets. It's that you can just be sitting there in a cafe and then this bike ride of naked people comes by, hooting their horns and on all these different shaped bikes and stuff. They just were suddenly hanging out and decided to take off their clothes and go riding. That's how it works in that place. But why am I even showing you this? Because for some reason we think we own our town so much that we will test the boundaries of what it even feels like to build community. What is this about? It's like reclaiming public space. Maybe it's about vulnerability. Maybe it's about communication. Or maybe it's just like feeling like, everything's going crazy, so I'm going to go sane. Or whatever their feeling is inside. So where this comes into the neighborhoods on the doable scale that anybody can do is really this story here, where these little girls had just gotten hit by a car crossing a busy street to get to a park. And these adults got together and were like, why in the world are there 500 houses surrounded by busy streets without a single place for kids to play? Why is there nowhere for adults to gather without having to buy some alcohol? Why is there no village square? So we invited this woman in the middle of this image here, the neighborhood historian, to come to the community, to this gathering, and help us understand. We're like, Eileen, you're always writing articles in the local paper about historic things in the neighborhood. Maybe you know the story. Why is there no place for kids? Why is there no public square? And she's like, we live in westward expansion. We live in manifest destiny. This is a colonial grid. We are housed as a working class to cut down trees and extract resources and send them back to the ownership class on the East Coast. That's how it was designed. people are like, no, that's impossible. That's not what we learned in high school at all. She's like, no, it's a very, very ancient story. It's been going on for 5,000 years, from ancient Assyria all the way to the Western Hemisphere. This thing's been happening. Pretty intense story. But she brought this list. She said, building community, getting people to talk, making gathering places, making it safe and livable, calming traffic, beautifying, engaging youth, inspiring other people. That's up to us. Because it's always on the list of things to do, and it never gets any funding, and it's not even about money anyway. So we had this talk, then these fathers stood up and they're like, wait, we're powerless, we can't do anything, how can we even talk about this? The mayor never comes here, she doesn't care. So fortunately there was this 13-year-old badass woman who stood up and said, I have done a chart of what everyone does for a living around this one intersection where the girls got hit. Maybe we could transform some existing public space into a new form of public space. And people were saying, oh, that's impossible. She's like, no, wait, 5 minutes. Take 5 minutes and connect the dots to see if we even knew each other, how we might work together. So people were like, there is a chef. Gosh, we do all like to eat, don't we? There's a doctor. We all do get sick, don't we? Gosh, there's an electrician and a plumber and a gardener and an ironsmith and an architect and a contractor. We could all be working together. 5 minutes later, it looked like this on the right. And then she's like, throw in the stay-at-home parents, throw in all the kids, and it became totally black with all the layers of connection. People were breathless. They were like, oh my God, we're already a village. But we didn't know it. So we tried to do this working with the Department of Transportation, and they said, that's impossible, go away. So we went to where we live and decided to do it anyway. So we did this, and the police showed up. But fortunately, we've been doing this proactive chocolate cake strategy with the police for several months. Every Monday night, they'd show up at 7, and these super cute little girls were waiting with chai and chocolate cake. So the police were like, this is awesome. We'd invite them into our little ramshackle tea house where we were having a potluck every Monday night. So they became villagers with us, and when we took the streets, literally Ed said, he's like 7 feet tall and very scary looking, but also quite gentle and sweet. He's like, I am not even going to report you. This is the coolest thing. I get fewer calls from this part of the neighborhood than anywhere else that I have to police in the city. Like, you guys are actually doing something really different. I'm not even going to report you. And when transportation gets mad, call me, because I will come stand with you. And that's exactly what happened. Transportation was like, we told you you can't do this. And we're like, well, apparently we can, because here it is. And like, but you don't have the power to do this. And we're like, well, apparently we do, because here it is. And they were just like, oh, this is awful. And then Ed walks in and he's like, back the freak off. Like, can you imagine police actually standing there being a hero? Like, back off. Maybe there's these things that only they can do for themselves. Maybe they should be engaged in the issues that they dwell in. So, okay, this was legalized unanimously for everyone to be able to do. And it started off looking like this burst of color. And then all these little interactive features on the corners. But we were dancing in the streets. We were like, yay, let's be villagers. If we have to be criminals to be villagers once more, bring it on. So here we are dancing in this illegally painted street. The police are getting on our side. We have this momentum and this total certainty that we're actually doing things that are important, that are like a birthright. Yeah, on the right there is the world's first little free library, according to articles. And now there's like 20,000 of them in the world. Like, what if a little carpenter guy hadn't gotten together with these 2 foster kids that day to build this? Maybe 20,000 more little libraries wouldn't exist. I can't wait to see all these solar-powered 24-hour self-service tea stations happen. That's the one on the left, and also at this first intersection. There's all these other projects that were built on the corners by the community who lives right there, designed by them. They gathered the materials, they tore up their yards, they put in gardens. The effect went all over the neighborhood and then expanded all over the city and then went to all these other cities. And this neighborhood's just like crossing a line where somebody said no to do something that mattered to them. But because everybody lives in the grid on the continent, it's an interesting story for everybody, because they're like, oh, how interesting. We could be safer, our children could be mentored, vandalism would basically vaporize because the kids have a creative outlet. Yeah, so here's a crazy story, or a crazy statement. Streets are for birthday parties, more than for cars. Now that seems crazy, because the only thing we see happening in streets are cars, right? But before cars existed, for thousands and thousands of years, the most important things that would happen in the spaces between our homes, that we saw as a commons that would bring us together, not as a thing that would divide us and isolate us. The most important thing were the things we did with our kids out there. And I'm talking about festivals and cultural celebrations and all sorts of projects, but especially this. Like shooting arrows out in the streets. Like, if it happens in somebody's backyard, it's that kid's backyard. But what if the time that you bring all the children together is where they stand on the space that they all own together? This is weird for an American, like, oh no, you mean I have something in common with others? Yeah, literally. We're so convinced, like, oh, separate, you're graded separately, separate social security numbers, St. Peter's got you separate in the book of life, like all the way till you're dead you're separate. But not in this neighborhood, where they sit down in the streets and have a puppet show, because that's what streets are for. I know this sounds crazy, but it's also for piñata parties. And when those kids knock that piñata open and its contents spill all over the street and they're picking up those things and laughing joyously, and then they go on to their crazy annual Romans versus the pagans water balloon fight, as they do in this neighborhood, you start to see that the streets are for way more than you ever realized before. You get a taste of it in a block party. But what if it starts to feel like this? Like, any direction you go in, these people have friends. What if like they're having a birthday party and they run out of some flour and sugar, like everybody's waiting to give something to their friend who's coming to ask for help? There's been fires in this neighborhood. The neighborhood puts out the fires. There's been neglected grandmothers who don't have any help and everybody comes to their rescue. Like, this is the stuff that we need to be doing every day with each other. Okay, so we noticed that the major daily media hadn't told the communities of the city that the city council had just legalized the transformation of streets. So we're like, fine, we'll just get creative again. So we had a broken down truck, and because we're a connected community of all these hundreds of people knowing each other, we easily found a mechanic, we easily found all these carpenters, and we built this outreach vehicle called the Tea Horse, a mobile tea house serving free chocolate mousse pie, rhubarb pie, bundt cake, whatever it was that people would bring to it, chai and tea, go around the city, to block parties, blocks, parks, wherever people would call it. It would show up as this mobile public square and help people to connect with other people where they lived. Whenever it would be set up, people would stand for a few minutes and make community announcements and sing happy birthday to anybody who was there whose birthday it was, and then they would jam into the night, repurposing neglected, empty public space and turning it into a vital village center, and then taking itself away so that people would be left with this void and this memory and this experience, so that then it was up to them to transform their community. So this was a catalyst. But that wasn't the only thing we did. We went around and around the city 27 times, and then we linked all these neighborhoods together in this huge circle called Hands Around Portland, where people stood together on World Peace Day, on the solstice, and said, this is our town. And we were responding to Noam Chomsky, who said, why don't we ever get together by the thousands to ever accomplish anything? Why are we always just fighting against stuff? So we said, all right, Noam, we'll cross 2 bridges, we'll connect 15 inner city neighborhoods, we'll have people stand together and claim their town, and that's just getting started. And then we went downtown and we had this huge party. We really did flood the streets with all these people, thousands of people wearing animal costumes. There was whale-sized costumes going down the street. There was whole schools of salmon, and we flooded into the major public square that had been what had been the beginning of our movement. And this is basically what we do every year on Earth Day. There's an Earth Day village that moves around the city. Then we built, I don't know how many more of these mobile tea party activator things. This is the tea pony built by homeless kids. It goes all over the city. They're like, oh, you think we got no place? Check this out. And it goes everywhere that they want it to go. So the tea horse and the tea pony are kind of like the Robin and Batgirl of mobile public free chocolate cake slinging tea houses. Okay, so what is happening on the blocks around these intersections? The transformation of basically isolated grids into villages. And in this case, they built this model. They're looking at their rectangles and saying, well, where's our commons? Where are the pathways that connect us? What about our local village economy? Are we just here to buy a ticket to somebody else's reality? Or will we be cultural generators in our own lives? Like, will we have a story that we inhabit? So they started to build gateways around the perimeter of their village. They started to put all these internal pathways, even though the rules and ordinances and basically all these things, sort of invisible structures, enforce your separation. Like, don't cross that line, it's so dangerous. Yeah, well, if you cross the line, you find that the danger has diminished because suddenly you have a connection, an interconnection. So pathways, searching for a village center. You can see people tearing down fences and putting in pathways.
embellishing their porches to actually make them into gathering places, even just by hanging curtains. And then coming up with this whole village program of places to be generative, places for resources, places for gathering, and then certainly a village art. This natural building in the lower right was actually subsidized by the city government because they wanted to see what a building with the lowest embodied energy and the highest community function would actually work like. Then we repurposed a house and turned it into a community school because we learned, oh, it's illegal to teach each other where we live. You can only have so many guests per 24-hour period before we break in some kind of rule that we never agreed to. So while we were at it, repurposing this house, we wrapped it inside and out illegally with straw, clay, and cob. And then we called the city and we're like, oh, we did it again, sorry. And they're like, well, that's okay, because we're Portland, and we'll retrofit this, and we'll retroactively legalize this, no problem. Which was done. Okay, and then we tear up the yards, we put in food forests and gardens, annual gardens, all around the freaking block. Little orchards. This is the world-famous 24-hour self-service chicken palace, shaped like an egg, of course, because chickens would think of that as home. This recycled plexiglass chicken beak sort of shaped front porch roof there. Chickens hang out there all the time. Then we learned that it's illegal for water to flow over a property line in the United States of America in any urban center. We're like, well, that's breaking the law of gravity for sure. So water will flow over all these lines on this block from the high point on the upper right to the lower point on the lower right, the lower left there. And we'll cross as many property lines as water feels like to make basically, we're sick of always going elsewhere to stewardship the water commons, the watershed. We need a watershed where we live. It'll help bring us together and give us more in common. And while we're at it, we're putting in ponds, putting in constructed wetlands and gray water systems, pre-legal systems, you might call them. This is probably the world's first solar-powered cat palace, self-service. Now, you've got to have a sense of humor about this stuff, you know? This is a 3-story cat skyscraper, and on the second level is the solar-powered aquarium room. Cats, you will find 3 cats laying there side by side, with their paws on the aquarium, just looking, sort of like they're praying. But they're actually really close to each other, and they don't care, because they're just focused on the fish. And on the top level, there's this whole bowl of catnip that they just kind of lay in as they look around to see if there's any mice. But they're not too motivated. And this is what the whole block looks like. So I think I'm almost ready to stop, but this is a model. But it's showing you the things that we can do mostly with what we already have stored in our basements, in our garages, in our closets. Almost everybody has basically a Walmart worth of crap at this point. And the way that we're going to transform where we live and make it work, for our own cultural impulses is to repurpose and share the things that we have, for sure. Because there isn't enough money, but there is enough inspiration and talent, for sure, in us. So many things to talk about. Just down the block from that square, they're putting the 3rd largest food forest in the United States. And this is some of the other intersections all around the city. And this is a Sunnyside neighborhood. This is a giant sunflower. And some people say, well, I don't want a sunflower in my neighborhood. Well, they don't get to have one. Because this is for the Sunnyside neighborhood, and this is their logo, so that's what they have. And every other neighborhood has to create their own thing. You can't have a sunflower. Fine. Here's kind of the ground level view. The Department of Transportation has said, we've never seen anything built community like this, and really it's not a surprise, because just like a bird needs a nest, and a fox needs a den, and every single kind of creature needs a habitat, human beings need a gathering place from their living room, and every scale in between that and the rotunda of the Capitol. There have to be places of convergence and interaction if we are going to be a resilient and regenerative society. Here's another one, where they're celebrating the history of their neighborhood, where they make turbines and propellers and wheels. That's part of their story. When we do this kind of thing, we start to realize that we have way more in common than we ever knew. Our polarized society is always fighting over these insolvable issues and then seizing power and tearing down the things that we've created. But what if our society is built upon this grassroots, most deepest sense of basically having more that we have to do with each other than less? And this is where it happens, in the streets. This is actually legal. And in the case of these kids, they said, adults, listen to us. We think we've got this design figured out for what should happen in the streets. Because after all, wouldn't dinosaurs be mad at cars because they're burning fossil fuels, and those are the bodies of dinosaurs? So isn't it just logical that a Tyrannosaurus Rex would come out of a manhole cover and eat a car with Superman helping? Like, let's get rid of this damn thing. Wouldn't that be the way it would happen? We're like, well, of course, apparently. I mean, unfortunately, the kids did that because the adults were like, okay, how can we make this all square and serious and gray and masculine and patriarchal and modernist? No way. Kids will have their metaphors. Another one. There's more than 500 installations all across the city of Portland, all motivated by different stories, designed and installed by the people who live right there as a reflection. These things, just this stuff right here, this is free. Anybody can do this all across the city in public space. Pre-approved, solar-powered cob kiosks, community composting facilities in the street, covered bike parking in the street, any kind of bench you could possibly want to build out of cob, weatherized with beeswax and linseed oil, and the Department of Transportation is like, that's so awesome. I mean, can you imagine? Like, when you're doing your activism, please just remember this. Don't just build a thing, build community. And while you're at it, totally intend systemic transformation in the political culture as well, because it doesn't turn out to be that hard. All right, let's just stop.